Hey everybody, welcome to DTNS Experiment Week. All this week, DTNS is on vacation, summer vacation. So we handed over the feed to our friends to try some stuff out. Each of them has an experimental podcast idea that they'd like your feedback on. So please send us your feedback at dailytechnewsshow.com, or leave your feedback at patreon.com/DTNS. We'll pass it along to them. And remember, each one of these is their podcast, so they are responsible for the content, but we hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you soon.
This week on IT SPARC Cast, Extreme gets intel from Intel. ESXi's AD/CVE means you better update PDQ, and the UK says okay to HPE buying Juniper. Greetings and welcome to IT SPARC Cast. I'm your host, John Barger.
Hi, and I'm Lou Schmidt, aka the other guy, your co-host. We've been around this stuff for a while, so let's get to it.
It's Thursday, August 8th. IT SPARC Cast is a digest of the IT news over the last week, with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts, each with over 20 years of experience working in IT or for IT vendors. And now for the news bites. According to a press release, Extreme Networks announced that it's formed a co-innovation alliance with the Intel Connectivity Analytics program. This is going to allow them to enhance their native AI capabilities within their Extreme AI Expert solution. For full disclosure for everybody, both Lou and I used to work for Extreme Networks, so just putting that out there so there's no conflict of interest here. So the Extreme AI Expert is a generative AI tool that allows a user to find information quickly, technical information that might be buried in various different repositories that Extreme has. They've got a knowledge base. They've got a bunch of different areas you can go to find documentation or how-tos and things like that. Many vendors are doing this with Gen AI now, so that's par for the course. You type in a problem, the answer is returned. You don't need to know the exact keywords that are required like you would with a standard search. This partnership with Intel and its connectivity analytics program is providing additional content about clients and other devices that'll be on the network that'll help those Extreme users without having to search just the Extreme database.
So I have a question about this. Is this the melding of Intel's internal documentation? Is this a documentation play? Or is this a projection of the vPro data that they collect off enterprise class laptops and servers?
It's a great question. And it's still early days figuring that out. I think it's actually both, but we'll have to see as this progresses and what happens with Extreme's AI Expert tool. I will say that when I went to the Intel site for the Connectivity Analytics Program API, mouthful there, that there are other vendors already using this. Cisco's already using it in a similar way. So this is, again, just kind of par for the course, adding more data into an existing tool that's really going to help out those Extreme customers.
So yeah, this could have a lot of potential. I've seen a lot of vendors try to tackle this space before. And this, let's go ahead and address this a little more down in the next point.
There you go. Why don't you jump right into it?
Absolutely. So this is a really interesting point, courtesy of our friends at InfoWorld. Your messy data is holding enterprises back from AI. Now, obviously, we're going to talk a lot about AI on this podcast, not because we love AI, but because it is the Godzilla in our Tokyo, right? It's coming through and it's getting everything. And there's a lot of hype around it. So we all see the potential of it, but we're seeing a lot of rocks in the paths. And according to these folks, basically, they're saying that your messy data, the data formatting, where you have it, how to identify it, and what is the cleanliness of that data is yet another load being dumped on your poor CIO to try to make this stuff work. Now, my comment on this would be, many of us have looked at the coming AI revolution as our opportunity to take this disordered data and apply some order to it. Maybe that's not going to be the way it goes. John, what do you think?
Well, it reminds me, back when I was in university, the old saying of garbage in, garbage out. And I think that's still true today. Large language models are just, they learn what they're given. And we've seen this in the hallucinations of the standard chatbots that we're seeing out there. We're going to see that if bad data is passed into these tools.
Well, that's a really good point. And actually, that also brings you on to our next tech bite.
Good point, Lou. And so what I've seen in an article in TechCrunch, Rob Mee, who was previously the CEO of Pivotal, has founded a new startup called Mechanical Orchard. Now, Mechanical Orchard is going to help companies with their digital transformation efforts. So digital transformation is this critical but difficult task that all organizations are eventually going to face. That's, if you think about back in the day, moving from calculators and ledger books to spreadsheets was a digital transformation that accounting and bookkeepers had to go through. Today, corporations are using moving their tools from on-prem to cloud and using AI and other advanced capabilities. Now, what if you have an old legacy application and these tools that were written years ago, and you've been using it and your company is really dependent on it? Digital transformation can be a daunting task and even prohibitive, from taking things down, understanding how the code is written, if it was written long enough ago that some of the people still aren't there. And that's where Mechanical Orchard is going to come in. They're using AI-enhanced tools and cloud instances to build modernized copies of these legacy apps and services that companies already have.
Wow, that's really interesting. A couple of thoughts right off the top of my head. One, I hope they've got some old COBOL guys stuffed in the back, because we ran into this in Y2K, and that code is really never gone away. The second thing that I wonder if these folks are going to do, many organizations have no idea where all their information is or where they're pulling it from. There's little pockets and silos of knowledge that are lost over time. It does make me wonder if it's possible for these folks to actually tell you how you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a good point. And to speak to COBOL, when I was in university, I aced every single technical class I took, whether it was programming languages or databases, except for COBOL. COBOL was the one class I got a D in because I just couldn't stand working on that. So I got a lot of respect for all those guys back in the Y2K days that did all that work, and they earned the money that they made. So in this case, what Mechanical Orchard is doing is it's a combination of AI and cloud instances and human consultation, where they're going to help you do a full transformation. It's not just turning it over to an AI, to an LLM, and saying, go make a new version of this app. It is involving experts, humans that know the source code and the type of code that's being used, the type of tools, the outcome that's expected, and so forth. It's just using AI and cloud instances to move that along, as it was one of the tools. They're not the only company doing something like this, but it seems like they've hit on something. So, for example, Alphabet's GV, which used to be Google Ventures, they think it's a good idea. They're leading an unsolicited $50 million Series B round of funding. That's going to make the total round of funding for A and B to be $74 million. I think that means that they see some legs here. They think that this is really going to work out.
That's not a small bet. One of the questions I would ask is Mechanical Orchard's model to provide a in-house professional services wing that will do this? Or are they going to build a tool that's going to enable HPE and Cisco and IBM to go out there and do this with enterprises?
Good question. My take on it is they want to be the main source. They want to be providing the people and the resources, but it is possible that they could scale out by going with somebody like an IBM or somebody like that. But with that, let's move on to our main stories. So we've already talked quite a bit about AI and IT, but that's going to lead to a whole new set of models and a lot of new things, including training your workforce. So Lou, what do you got on that?
Well, something just crossed my path here from the lovely folks over at Computer World recently. And they had an article talking about why you need to train the AI-enabled workforce. Now, when I initially looked at this, I thought, okay, is this the type of training that we talk about, end user training? How do you effectively use the AI? That's going to happen. But this is actually talking about how do you train your organization to structure itself such that it can take advantage of this. And you know, at the beginning of this year, 87% of the 200 companies surveyed by Bain & Company said they were already developing, piloting, or had deployed Gen AI in some capacity. Most of the early rollouts involve tools for software code development. We're seeing a lot of activity in there, customer service, marketing and sales, and product differentiation. So that's really great. We've got these early adopters going out there. What you can take away from this is that we, IT professionals, we're all looking at it. It's sucking up a lot of resources, right, is the second thing. It's causing us to shift folks from other roles over to this function, or we've had to lay people off and hire new people, which is expensive because there's not a lot. It's like hiring a web expert at the beginning of the World Wide Web. It was really difficult to get these people. But the challenge is the stuff that the folks were doing that you either cross-trained or replaced did not go away. AI was supposed to remove that, but it hasn't. Not yet. We don't know enough yet. And we're not at the point where that AI can replace those folks.
Yeah, so I was just thinking, you and I both have a significant background in training as well as IT. So like, and I see this as a shift, a monumental shift, as everybody's aware. That's not new information, but shifting in general is really difficult for any organization. So, and when you talk about something this substantive, something that's so massive that's going on right now is this kind of AI revolution. What's the recommendation? What do we do to move forward here?
That's great. Well, they do have, one of the observations that was pointed out by this article was that even if you've banned AI in your organization, which many organizations are certainly looking at, we've seen for example, some pushback about AI being included into vendor operating systems that could potentially compromise your proprietary data. The problem is users are doing it anyway, right? They're out there, they're doing this thing. Now the challenge is one Gartner senior director mentioned that they were recommending taking it slow, not upscaling workers in Gen AI until they had specific use cases. But because this individual sees workers using Gen AI behind the scenes, even at organizations that have banned it, you've got to take a different approach. John?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the classic conundrum of any IT organization of shadow IT. If you're not providing a service that I want, I'm going to find it on my own. So banning anything is never going to work. You can't ban smartphones. You can't ban personal devices. You can't ban AI. It's just not going to work. So what do we do?
Well, one of the things you can do is assemble a team, and this is what they're recommending. This is what the specific training at this stage is about, is how do you put a Gen AI, getting an AI team together? right? You're going to need a data scientist. And that's a really very heavy title, but really you're looking at input formatting and bounds checking. Is the data going in correctly? An AI software engineer that can build you models, customize models, check and make sure that the software is not accessing anything it shouldn't. That's going to be really important. A new C-suite chair will probably come out of this, which would be a chief AI officer. How do you set policy in something that the business model is driving, but the business decision makers don't truly understand? We've been through this before, which was the rise of the CSO and chief security officer, and adjunct to that, the chief privacy officer. AI security, this one is going to be fun, in my opinion, because what does that mean, right? Does it mean we're protecting an application? Okay, we've been doing that for years. We know how to protect applications. I think this is Lou's personal opinion based on what I've seen with other technologies, that we're going to see new types of attacks, mimetic attacks, where you're going in and you're trying to mess up the linkage of the information inside the model, which is very, very challenging to configure. If somebody trips you correctly mimetically, you got a problem. And there's going to be an awful lot of activity around that. Prompt engineering. How do you ask the right questions? Prior to this to this recording session, John and I were talking about the difference between asking questions of a search engine and asking questions of a Gen AI, and how it reduced or eliminated the requirements for keywords. But sometimes if you really want to drill down, you've got to know how to ask the right question. And the last thing is legal. Yes, somebody's going to get sued over this.
So we're already seeing that people are getting sued left and right with large language models today.
That is true. And so organizations, before we can even get to the point of training organizations on what they need to do with their end user AI, we don't even have a structure inside these orgs. And a lot of orgs don't know they need it. That's what I think the thrust of this is. And I think it's a good idea. And folks, you should be thinking about this.
Yeah, 100%. And I love the analogy you made of the rise of the chief security officer and and all those other C-suites. And that's really going to be what's required here. And then that person will have to take lead in the organization to make sure that they're using AI properly and efficiently, and not, again, allowing shadow IT to come over, because that data protection is going to go away if I'm just using ChatGPT for all my, sensitive corporate work without going through the proper channels. So I love that part of this topic.
There is one point that I didn't bring up that I had pondered earlier, and this is going to play in majorly, and it wasn't listed out in this, but I think it would be a good addition. Most of us are subject to ISO certification. What is this going to do to your ISO certification? No, I don't know that anybody has really answered that question yet. So
that's a great point, and it's something I hadn't thought of either. And as somebody who's had to go through the rigors of ISO certs for various applications and tools that I was responsible for, that's going to get really, really interesting. And I think that's an area that many companies are just not prepared for today.
I think we're going to both be back talking about this one in the future. Sure. Absolutely. But you had an interesting point for the next one. Would you like to talk about some big movements going on?
Yeah. So, we're all aware of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise's desire to acquire Juniper, and it's going through its regulatory processes. A little while ago, the European Union approved it, and now the UK's Compensation and Markets Authority Act has approved the acquisition. So this is one of the last steps. There's still a few more to go through, but they're getting there, and it looks more and more like it absolutely will happen. And there wasn't much doubt in it, but this was just one of those steps that had to get through. And we've seen recently the UK Compliance and Markets Authority, the CMA, put the hold on a few items, the acquisition from Microsoft recently of Activision and things like that, where they were putting it on the brakes, but then they got through it and everything's working out. So that's what's going on here. I think that this is going to be a really interesting shift in the network infrastructure core market when these two medium-sized companies come together and form what's probably the biggest challenger to a Cisco that's really ever been out there. It used to be that we would refer to Cisco and everybody else as the other little guys. And now I think you're going to see that this is a really big shift in the market. The question then comes out is, if you're an existing customer of HPE Enterprise / Aruba, or from Juniper Mist, how much concern do you have about the tools that you're using today, and are they going to be here in 2 years?
That's an interesting point. I look at it so full disclosure, I have worked for Juniper, so I have more than a passing acquaintance with what they have and how they do it. And I have friends who did the Mist acquisition. The challenge that I see is the big overlap in this is the Aruba Mist overlap. Everything else, whether you're looking at servers, when you're looking at security, when you're looking at sort of the big iron stuff on the networking side, that's clearly there's no real conflict there. Juniper's going to have the bigger routers and higher scale in a lot. Where you're going to see the friction, I think, is in the enterprise desktop space and possibly in the data center. Although personally, I think that's going to lean more towards Juniper, but that's going to depend on how the tools go. Now, the question I have is, while we live in sort of a tripolar cloud where we have HPE, Juniper, whatever they're going to call that, you've got Cisco, which seems to be rapidly getting out of the networking business. That's just the way I've been reading it. I don't know how you folks are on it. And then you have this cloud of a whole bunch of other smaller players. Are we going to see consolidation amongst those smaller players? What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think you're going to see that happen. I mean, I know, looking at some of these companies and their market caps, if you had asked me 2 years ago, how much of that kind of consolidation would you see? I would have said, these companies are now worth $2, $3, $4, $5, $6 billion, and that's not it's not an easy case to make those acquisitions. But I mean, this acquisition of Juniper is a $14 billion deal. I think that you might start seeing more and more acquisitions and more consolidations. Maybe you'll find like a firewall company, so call it a Palo Alto, that doesn't really have much in the way of LAN enterprise switching and wireless, but they're going up against a Fortinet. So maybe they're going to need to increase their portfolio in order to compete better against Fortinet. Maybe they don't. Maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's something more out there that we hadn't considered that would come in and make some acquisitions and see what's going on there.
A consideration that I have looking at all this as well is we all started to work from home during our last pandemic. The echoes of that are still going through our system. If you've been watching commercial real estate at all, this is one thing I pay attention to, because if you're going to go after the traditional IT vendors we think about, go after carpeted enterprise. And, your enterprise locations, there are very few areas where that's growing and a lot of areas where the bottom is falling out of the market. So where is the next growth? Simultaneously, we're seeing large cloud scale challenges, whether it's cost or a software problem or an attack. Folks are starting to rethink how much they want to have in the cloud. So the new IT landscape, John, to your point, might be completely different.
It might be. I think there's a lot for us to dig into, and maybe in a future episode we'll dig in deeper as to what's going to happen with this acquisition. But I think it's time for us to move on to one of our regular segments, the CVE of the week.
The common vulnerability and exploits. And we have a tasty one for you this week, because anything that says VMware on it, all of us are going to pay attention to. So let me walk you through what the announcement was on this earlier. This is a relatively new one. What we're talking about is CVE-2024-37085, which is a vulnerability that allows you to use Active Directory to completely annihilate your ESXi complex. Now, maybe some people wouldn't say it that way, but we're going to be honest here. So here's what happened, right? How this bug works is that if you can get into Active Directory as a privileged enough user that can create a group, and you create a group called ESXi admin, even if that group doesn't exist, or if that group exists, you add yourself to it. Then ESXi does not have any security protocols in place to check what's going on with ESXi admins. If it sees that group and you're confederated with Active Directory, boom, you're in. At that point, and mind you, this is ESXi, not vCenter, right? So you're going directly to the virtual machine hosts. As soon as you start grabbing those hosts, you're going to start horizontally going through this. Now you can encrypt those, destroy them, whatever you want to do. A lot of talk about this this week. There's some interesting side notes to this. John, what do you think about this?
So it's interesting. My understanding is you have to compromise a host that already has enough permissions to do something in Active Directory, or compromise a user and jump into that Active Directory. So, I mean, it sounds like to some degree it's a small footprint for the attack vector, but we all know that sometimes these things blow up. So you want to wager on who's the first OS that's going to be the main attack vector is going to be?
Well, I don't think we have to wager that much, because this bug was uncovered by Microsoft's team, which did a really good job of analyzing it and breaking it down. The initial vector in there is something called Quackbot, which has been around since 2008. So essentially what you're going to do is hit somebody up with a phishing link or a malicious document, get Quackbot in there, start moving horizontally through the network until you can compromise somebody with enough credentials to get at this. And then you can execute this attack, which is probably why folks aren't screaming about this more. Because one, if you're not confederating your identity into Active Directory, and allow me to sort of extrapolate that a bit, does that mean Azure as well? Based on what I've read with this, I believe it does. However, I would love for some user to come and correct that. By all means, we want to hear your feedback on this stuff. But I did some research. Once you add ESX admin, that is the key part. It's a default group in ESXi. Now, this has been patched. If you're running the latest patch level, came out at the end of last month, you have the patch. But the challenge is this has been actively exploited. And it's been exploited for some time. As far as we know, this one's been out there for a while. So there's a couple things you can do. You can block that group from being created. Obviously, you want to also patch your software. But I would probably lock that group out if you could, just to make sure for safety. Another way that these folks have been getting into it is they'll get enough domain responsibility to control like one group, and then they rename the group. That's a nasty one, right? Go in, rename the group and go. And then even if the network administrator assigns any other group in the domain to be management group from ESXi hypervisor, the full admin privileges of EXI admins are not immediately removed. Threat actors could still, so you got to lock that group down and do your patching. But even if a vendor says, yeah, we've patched that, paranoia is key.
So here's the question. If you've already compromised, is patching enough, or do you actually have to go take additional remedial action?
I would recommend a complete reload at that juncture. I mean, the problem is that once they've Trojaned in something, they bring in so many other kits with them. These off-the-shelf compromise systems, Microsoft's write-up on it does detail some of what they've seen, how it's attaching itself to the processes. So I would recommend following that CVE back to Microsoft and taking a look at and how they're doing it. But the challenge with the type of exploit this is that the Quackbot is only in the first kit that comes in, right? While it's exploiting your ESXi servers, it's probably going after everything else you've got. So this is, the real problem is you were exploited.
Right.
The backup problem is the isolation you thought you had in your virtual machine infrastructure, it got nuked.
There you go. That's the big one.
Yeah. So that's why we talk about this stuff.
Thanks, Lou. That was great information, and it's something that we all need to know about. And that wraps our inaugural episode of IT SPARC Cast. Special thanks to Tom and Roger from Daily Tech News Show. Without their inspiration and help, this podcast would not have happened. Let us know if there are other topics you want to hear from us in future episodes. Feedback at itsparkcast.com. And just as a note, that is itsparkcast.com. We're also at IT SPARCcast on X and on YouTube, so please check us out there. Going forward, you can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts and watch us on YouTube. We'll see you next week.
That's it for Experiment Week. Let us know what you think about what you've heard. Send us an email, feedback at dailytechnewsshow.com. We will be back with our normal DTNS schedule on Monday with Shannon Morse. Talk to you then.